Hi, got another story. They just keep coming, don't they? Zouk lived in a bustling metro area and did well for himself financially. He wanted for nothing that this world could offer. If it was for sale, he was able to obtain it. He lived in the penthouse on the tallest building in the city, a financial center the world looked to for money management. This building of glass, steel, and concrete was a beacon for the whole city, as its gold tinted glass reflected the sun in the day and it shone brightly at night with spotlights and the illuminated spire that contained a radio tower and other important technologies. Everyone in the city referred to this modern achievement as Babel. Many did not know the reference to the ancient civilization. In actuality, the building was titled Gateway of Development. People that worked in the building called it God for short. The commoners phrased on Monday mornings in the offices, 5 more days, gotta serve God. It was a battle cry to endure the drudgery of civilized employment. Cray walked up the granite steps to the building's front entrance and was greeted by the doorman. Good morning, Mr. Zouk. The doorman tipped his uniformed hat with his white-gloved hands. Cray walked past him without notice into the building's grand parlor. It was early in the morning, yet it was filled with tourists murmuring and taking selfies. This always enlivened Cray's disgust for society, for his status gave him the idea that these common folks oogled themselves on his front porch. The door shut behind him, and the doorman said quietly, Don't jump from your penthouse today, Mr. Zouk. I just got my Cadillac limo washed, and I wouldn't want you to land on it. Then tipped his hat once again. Cray walked through the ever-growing crowd that was lining up to go to the observation deck 50 floors below his swimming pool. He stepped into one of the 8 elevators that followed, and in followed some maintenance workers. He quickly stepped back out, for he did not want to hear them talk about their day, nor did he want to respond to their pleasantries. He walked across the hall into an empty elevator and quickly pressed the door close button. He waved his hand over the elevator's chip reader, and this gave him priority to ride alone without any stops for other passengers. The high-speed elevator whizzed him to the top, and the doors opened, and the AI chimed in and said, 90th floor, Mr. Zouk. Have a pleasant day, in its syrupy niceties. Cray walked out into the hall, then into another elevator that automatically opened when it registered Mr. Zouk's RFID chip implanted in his hand. The AI welcomed him again and asked what floor. Penthouse, he said harshly. Cray also had expressed disdain for digital servants. However, he preferred them as they did not gossip about him as he passed out of earshot like humans are known to do. The elevator shot up, and within seconds the door opened to his penthouse foyer. Immediately, stepping out of the elevator, the utilities of his home adjusted to his preferences, for the computer sensed his chip. The lights dimmed 15%. The air conditioning kicked on to achieve the selected 74 degrees, and his automated bar poured him a 50-year-old scotch on the rocks. 53 grams of rocks, precisely. Cray walked over and grabbed his drink while setting his briefcase on the bar. Then he sat in his sheepskin recliner to overlook the city. His penthouse had no exterior walls, just large windows, which at his request could turn dark gray with a small charge of electricity. The scotch went down easily with its smooth burn. The ice rattled in the empty glass when he put the drink onto a metal table. The table had a titanium top that was held up by a bronze casting replica of Atlas holding up the world. Cray likened himself to a titan, and this pressure was wearing on his soul. Cray didn't believe in souls, for he did not know his own. However, he was starting to, for he had every and anything he wanted except peace of mind. Worry was his coach to do better, be better, and earn more than anyone, especially his rivals, which was everyone. He sat reclined, rubbing his temples to rid the tension between his eyes. Gemini, he called to his computer. Yes, Mr. Zouk, the house CPU answered in question. Please download a list of sanitariums to my phone. Yes, Mr. Zouk, thank you, the computer answered in a glazed tone of digital sweetness. Cray swiped his phone and studied the short list of mental wellness centers. He stopped at Milton Health Retreat and reviewed it. It was listed as a retreat center for rest and counseling for those that need respite from everyday life. Its idyllic country setting offered a gentle cure for the ails of modern life. One could find peace and restoration through our programs that have helped thousands. Recovery of your souls was suggested in their pitch, as well as 5-star lodging and masterful cuisine artfully prepared by world-famous chefs. Cray called out to Gemini, Book me a week's stay at Milton. Yes, Mr. Zouk, thank you, Gemini replied. It was early the next morning that Cray slid into his limousine and sat down. The chauffeur closed his door gently and then drove out of the basement garage of Gateway building into the melee of traffic of the city. Mr. Zouk took a small pill out of a silver box and placed it under his tongue. The meds started to dissolve under his tongue immediately, and Cray's neck relaxed and his head sunk into the cushioned leather seat of his limo. Fashioned sleep overtook his reality. The car drove on. It was hours before they got out of the city's traffic and a few more before they arrived at Milton. As the driver pulled up to the gated entrance, he felt nervous to wake Mr. Zouk from his rest. He used the intercom that allowed communication through the bulletproof tinted window that separated them. Mr. Zouk, we have arrived at Milton. If you would like, I can drive on until you are ready to enter. The intercom answered, Enter. The driver entered a code into the retreat's keypad, and the massive iron gates opened to allow entry. They drove through the entrance under the watchful digital eyes of the security cameras. The gates closed behind them as they drove up the long drive toward the hill where the resort sat just below the mountains that framed the picturesque scene. All along the driveway on both sides were cherry trees in full bloom. The radiance of the pink blossoms was diminished by the limo's window tinting. They reached a circular area with a round fountain in the center of it, which had bronze sculptures of cherubim in various poses playing instruments just under the spray of the fountain. The fountain's water spray offered rainbows to the naked eyes of observers. Cray did not notice them through his bulletproof windows of his limousine. The driver pulled up to the entrance, got out and opened Mr. Zouk's door and stood waiting. Cray stepped out and was greeted by a man dressed in a suit and a white lab coat over it. Also, an attractive nurse wearing a tight uniform was by his side. Welcome to Milton, Mr. Zouk, they said in concert, wearing fake smiles. Cray only nodded with a look of contempt on his face. Right this way. We shall show you to your lodging. The doctor swept his hand in the direction towards the retreat center. The driver followed them with Cray's luggage. They entered the grand hall, and the staff was lined up in a semicircle to greet them further. Cray's cold demeanor remained the same. "I'd like to go to my room," he softly demanded. "Right this way, Mr. Zouk." The bombshell nurse motioned him to follow her up the grand staircase that resembled one from a palace. She walked and wiggled as Cray followed her up the stairs. The driver was told to leave the luggage as the doctor motioned for him to leave. The door was shut behind him and locked. He walked to the limo, got in, and said, "Money sure can buy you into some strange situations. I'm happy I'm broke." He smiled at his misfortune and fired up the Cadillac's engine and raced toward the gate. The nurse walked through the ornately carved oak doors into Mr. Zook's suite and toward it for his pleasure. She made extra moves to display the real reason that she was the one to receive Cray. He was not interested in her hospitality. Her professionalism almost prevented her from pouting from his rejection of any special favors. She tried one last time by dropping her pass key and bending over slowly to retrieve it. Cray stood staring out of his window while holding back the heavy purple drapery. "I hope that your stay with us is enjoyable and fruitful, Mr. Zouk," she feigned in a caring tone as she closed the heavy doors quietly. Cray opened his silver box, removed 2 small pills, and put them under his tongue. He walked over to the bed and melted into his chemical relaxation. The night came and went. Dawn entered the room by the opened drapery and shone its light across Cray's face. He wakened and shook off the remainder of the pills. "Gemini, I need my coffee and scotch," he demanded. There was no answer. Cray remembered that he was not at home. There was a knock on the room's door a few minutes later. "Enter," Cray said authoritatively. In walked a different nurse wearing a less tight uniform, carrying a silver tray with coffee. There were also silver vessels with cream and sugar, along with some fresh-made pastries. "Here is your coffee, Mr. Zouk," she smiled, revealing perfect white gleaming teeth. "Here is a menu of today's meal, Mr. Zouk. As always, we can provide any fare you desire at your request." She politely bowed her head and placed the tray onto an elaborate table, then turned and left the room, closing the door behind her. Cray drank his coffee and took a long hot shower. He got dressed and left his room to explore the lavish interior of the retreat. Each hallway had a small camera monitoring it. The doors all had locks on them that can only be opened by a passkey with an RFID chip. The Institute had already scanned Cray's own chip, thus granting him access to the areas in accordance with his paid service fee. He entered one room and found rich leather chairs and chaise lounges, finely carved woodwork on the walls, and fine art oil paintings that hung on the walls with illumination to view in the dimly lit room. One half of the room was a humidor and offered thousands of varieties of cigars and other smoking implements such as pipes, hookahs, and the like. He traveled on down the hall and came to a set of windows overlooking a carefully landscaped garden. He walked past, uninterested. On he went until he came to a door that would not open. The door was not like any other that he had walked through in this place. It was rather plain, made of metal and painted to resemble wood as to not appear unlike the rest. Cray knocked on the door. He heard a hollow echo come from the other side. The doctor then appeared from around the corner at the other end of the hall. "Good morning, Mr. Zouk," he said with a buttery inflection. Why is this door locked? Cray asked suspiciously. Oh, that is just a service entrance, the doctor answered. Shall we head to the smoking room for a cigar, Mr. Zook? No, I don't smoke, Cray retorted. How about we start on your council, Mr. Zook? That will be fine, Cray returned. The two turned and walked a ways down a few hallways and entered into a small room that had comfortable chairs and soft lighting. They both sat and began Cray's transformative therapy session. The doctor sat and asked Cray questions, always reminding him that he was not obliged to answer. Cray spilled his guts. He told the doctor about his failings, how he hated himself, how he hated everyone else, how his father hated him and his mother too. He spoke about the hazing that he suffered by his education and his peers and other powerful, rich men that ruled over others. He talked about his addiction to chemical stimulants and relaxants, his alcoholism, the abuse that he suffered from his own mind, how he did not add up to his own expectations and demands. The doctor sat motionless, himself high on pharmaceuticals. Cray went on about the times he tried to take his life, but was too greedy and couldn't bear to lose everything that he had just because he couldn't pull it together. The doctor only nodded at Cray's confessions of woe, for he truly did not care at all. Hours passed and the doctor's high was diminishing, so he called a session and said that if Mr. Zook was ready, that they could continue again sometime tomorrow. Cray felt worse for showing his weaknesses to another man. He got up and went to his room. He opened the door, and to his surprise, there was an old man mopping the floor of his room. This roused his disgust for the common man. Cray stood there bitterly, staring the old man down, expecting him to leave immediately. The old man continued mopping as if he did not notice Mr. Zook's demands. He started to whistle. His whistle echoed nicely off of the walls of the large room and the marble-tiled floor. It had a soothing quality, and the melody was the song titled Memories. Cray accepted defeat and that the man was not going to leave until the vast marble floor was mopped entirely. He sat in a softly padded chair and watched the man work. The man mopped and whistled on. He made his way over to Cray and feigned surprise to see Mr. Zook sitting there. Oh, I didn't hear you come in with all these old ears of mine. I'll be finished in a jiffy. Cray was exhausted from his therapy session, and he had no fight or demand left in him, so he sunk further into the chair. The man moved expertly through the room with the mop. It appeared to Cray that he was dancing with it. The man was enjoying his work, and it looked as if he was actually having fun. The old man glided over to the mop bucket and dipped the mop into the water, pulled it out, and let the water run from its strands as he pulled a bandana from his back pocket to pretend to wipe sweat from his brow. He put the rag back into his pocket, then wrung out the rest of the water from the mop with the bucket's wringer. He started to mop again. This time he whistled a different tune, one that Cray did not recognize. Eventually, the old man made his way over to the chair where Cray sat. When he neared it, he stopped mopping, then extended his hand to Cray and said, Tobias Freeman is my name, but everybody calls me Freeman. Freeman then extended his hand to Cray for a handshake. Cray's look of disgust softened, and to his own surprise, he shook Freeman's hand and said, My name is Cray Zook. Well, pleased to meet you, Cray, the old man said genuinely and began to mop again. Cray felt Freeman's sincerity, and it moved him inside his soul. That moment, Cray had a longing, not a desire like he has had for the things of the world, but a longing to be like Freeman. It washed over him. It felt uncomfortable. Freeman worked away from Cray, his back turned to him, all the while joyful in his work and song. Cray looked around the back of his leather chair to watch Freeman work. Tobias pretended that he didn't notice and carried on. He swayed in toil into the corner of the room expertly with his mop, then turned to see Cray studying him intently. He straightened himself up and then leaned on his mop with one hand and pulled his bandana out once more to wipe the mock sweat from his brow. "Want to give it a try?" he asked as he offered the mop handle to Cray. Mr. Zouk was filled with disdain for such a question. However, Cray managed to utter, "Yes, please." Freeman walked over to Cray and passed the mop to him, then sat in the leather chair, still warm from Mr. Zouk. Cray looked at the mop curiously. He felt the softness of the well-worn wood handle polished by all of the hours of Freeman's toil. He slowly moved the mop and felt a drag on the floor. It felt heavier than he had imagined it would. "It's more like a lift and pull motion than a push and scrape," Freeman offered from the comfort of the chair. Cray took his advice and the mop glided across the white marble. The wet streaks glistened, and Cray saw his reflection in the shining floor. To his surprise, he noticed that he was smiling. It hurt his face to do so, yet he persevered, and the strange anguish went away. Cray mopped on, and it became easier. Then something happened inside of his head. Anxiety went away. The thoughts of inadequacy faded, and he became enough for himself. Cray and his mop went about the room, covering ground that was already cleaned expertly by Tobias. He was lost in a common everyday chore, and he loved it. He had mopped the same area 3 times as he wasn't cleaning the floor at all. Cray was washing away the pretentiousness that sickened him. He went over the same spot a 4th time, and Freeman called to him in a friendly tone, "You missed a spot." Cray went over it again and smiled fervently. He was pleased to have done so. "Now dip the mop in the bucket, let it drip and wring it out," Tobias offered with his helpful instruction as he sat watching. Cray waddled over to the mop bucket with difficulty because of the wet floor. His $5,000 custom-made leather shoes offered no grip on wet marble. He dipped the mop in the bucket and let it drip as he had watched Freeman do. Then he spun it in the wringer and pulled down on the handle. The dirty water gushed out back into the bucket. Cray lifted the mop carefully and started on the tiles once again. "Yeah, you're doing all right," Freeman offered his encouragement. Cray went over the entire floor once again, and Tobias thought that he had heard Cray trying to whistle, but he did not comment. Cray finished his toil and placed the mop in the bucket and wheeled it over towards his room's oak doors. Freeman got up from the leather chair and walked over to Cray and his mop kit. He turned and looked over the entire floor as if he was inspecting the quality of Cray's work. "Yes, sir, a fine job for your first time. What do you say I teach you how to whistle for next time? I find that it helps make the job a bit more joyful." "Well, it was a pleasure working with you, Mr. Zouk," Freeman said as he offered his hand for another handshake. Cray had never heard the phrase "working with you" before, as he was always a boss, partner, or director of the project. He shook Freeman's hand with a smile and said, "Thank you, Mr. Freeman." And he meant it. "Freeman," Tobias said. "Just Freeman." He smiled and winked and grabbed his mop handle and walked from the room. Craig closed the door slowly behind him, then looked at the floor of his room in a pleased manner. He raised his hand to his nose to smell the bleach and floor cleaner. To him, it became a satisfying scent. He carefully walked on his still damp, clean floor and fell backwards on his bed and took a nap.